So it's recording to the cloud. I'm not sure which world exactly in the cloud it's recording to.
We have several
But it's,
choices.
we have several
We have
choices,
many
right?
choices. Give me a
But
second.
it's, so welcome and, two new people, David and Suzanne, with Cherise. And so, this is a book club, but we really discuss all kinds of ideas around the topic too, as can be imagined. And we're using this book by Aryeh Kaplan, which is really out of print. I mean, now I said this the first time. I think we may own the most copies bought in the last number of years in our synagogue right now.
Thanks, Karen.
Okay, Laurel's coming to it, right? And so this is based on a series of talks that he gave. Again, Aryeh Kaplan passed away pretty young, but he was very influential in his time. And his Kabbalah is very lucid and clear and interesting and a great departing point, even if he's more orthodox in his approach, perhaps, than I may be. I like to be a little bit more not quite as tied to a more dogmatic way of looking at how everything is arranged and of what Judaism looks like.
We
But
never discussed the name of that book, it just dawned on me.
Inner Space,
Yeah.
well, it's about inner space. What do you think? Yeah, it's about the space inside of one.
Inner space.
It's about it's about the space inside of one, right? And how we quantify it and think about it. And because on one level, I mean, our whole topic today is all the worlds. Some, the worlds are up there, but they're also in here, right? I mean, at least that's how we experience them. And as my father always says, the worlds, hello, Diane, the worlds are, it's not like there's a place you take a starship to, right? There are different states of mind on some level. And you reach them by having your being vibrate to those, that's in that sense, into different states of mind. And we all experience different states of mind. But before we go into all of it, since this is a book club, I wanted to ask everyone, the main part of the chapter is really about the four worlds that the Kabbalah describes, and is about everything that is contained in them, all the angels, and that's how does everybody feel about the idea of different realms of existence that are beyond the physical? Do you believe in it, or do you
They all
experience
sort of
it?
got connected, as I read it,
Mhm,
like kind of a building thing.
mhm, they're all connected to each other, yeah.
Well, it's a model. I mean, I wouldn't take it absolutely literally, but it's a model of your inner experience. Or it can be a model of your experience. And if you really understand the model cognitively really well, it's not hard to understand it cognitively.
Mhm.
What can happen is if you have some inner experiences, they won't scare you because they'll fit.
Well,
You have a
it's
sense that other
it's a
people
map.
have had. Yeah, it's like a map.
But he is saying that it's more than just, even though I said it's inner and outer, but he is saying that this is a map. It's metaphysics too, right? So it is a map of an experience, but he is saying this is to some degree a reality of the world out there. Anybody have? So,
There was a remarkable amount of redundancy, excuse me, and some discordance between the prior chapter and this one.
okay.
Evokes some of the same basic characters and some of the same basic characteristics, but does it differently.
Mhm,
So you have to ask yourself the question,
mhm,
as a neophyte to this,
mhm,
which is it?
mhm.
So this is basically metaphor on top of metaphor on top of metaphor. The metaphor is allegorical, and as it should be. But the issue is that you have to, I think, to understand it, you have to have very well-rooted, well-rooted understanding in the basics. So to that point, as much as our feedback is important,
Sure.
I would like you to kind of set it straight, because it's very easy, unless you are a scholar in this, to
Yes,
go awry. So if I may make by analogy,
sure.
some of the rewriting of history that has occurred in the last several years is interesting. Critical race theory, It's a very interesting idea, but it is not designed for people in high school or even for that matter in college. It was designed to be discussed at a very, very high level. So within that context, with a firm understanding of what came before, it's a fascinating way of looking at it. But to view that as snippets and trivial little bits, that's when it kind of goes awry. So to the point of why is it that you had to be over 40 years old before you were exposed to this? You had to be a male, you had to be this, you had to be this. It implied the fact that there was an underlayment of knowledge and experience in order to be able to bring this in and assume it, if I may. So certainly speaking for me as a neophyte, and I certainly don't begin to think that I understand it because I read this several times. I gotta tell you, I was just confused. I'm just
Why we have this class.
there you go. So if you can kind of take us down
Sure.
this road,
Mhm.
that would be very,
Wonderful. It's exactly what I plan to do, but I'll say the difference in my mind between this and the critical race theory or any other kind of, is that this in essence is not an intellectual pursuit, even though in some ways it might feel that way. It's an experiential pursuit that comes from really transcending mind. And the reason there's so many allegories and so many metaphors is because you're describing something that's beyond shape or form. And so how do you describe it? Well, something like an intellectual theory, you're trying to bring words to societal patterns and evolution and growth, and the way you quantify it, I think, is different. And I think the purpose of this is not to be only interesting, but to, in moments and flashes of understanding, kind of open the mind and feel like, okay, I understand existence, including my own self, in a kind of new way. And so the whole of Kabbalah, I mean, the Zohar, which is a chief work of Kabbalah, and it's very dense and very hard to understand. But as one of my Zohar teachers, when I was studying in Israel, said that Zohar is like jazz. It's meant to be experienced. It's not meant to be understood. And it's not easy to understand it. I mean, you can pick up a translation and this and that, but part of it is that through the use, and this is the Zohar itself, through the use of the words, it puts you into a certain state of mind. And the Zohar will say, in the deepest secret of the highest supernal secret, and all this language is meant to kind of shift our state of mind to be more open to some of the ideas. The way, I think in so many other places in society, in our lives, you go to a place you go to university, everything's meant to get you to study, or you go to a casino, everything's meant to make you spend money, and so I think that these are trying to open up the mind, and that this is unique to Judaism, that the path of understanding scientifically spirit and the worlds of inner space is in itself a pursuit. And the Kabbalists would say that, when they were studying this, it made them feel so blessed and filled them with so much feeling of life and of vitality. And so I think that having that experience in some ways is more important than kind of trying to understand every little thing. And there is an order to all of it. I wouldn't say it's quite as ordered as medicine, for example, or because it's dealing with things that we don't have tools to measure. But there is a pretty strong sense of order, and I can only speak from my own experience that there's moments where suddenly you're studying it, and suddenly comes alive, and the system makes sense. When the system makes sense, it's like you went to school and you suddenly understood a new thing, and that opens up something within. But it does work better if at the same time one is engaged in whatever form of kind of meditative practice we find interesting, whether it's prayer or meditation or contemplative walk or surgery, or I don't know, whatever it is for different people, because it's touching on what happens in those moments and trying to give an order to it, not just an order, but like a path to go further. And I think this is one of the great things, this is one of the big claims of the Kabbalists and the Hasidim too, which is when you can do this, you can experience all these things and have no idea what it is, but to experience it and know what it is, first of all, means you can teach it to others. That's how they talk about it, but it also means that you can go further in your own explorations of it. I think that in terms of the 40-year-old thing, I think we live in a space that I think everybody here is over 40, but we're not, yeah. But the the male and female thing, I think, was partly a chauvinist, kind of approach to
Well,
religion in general.
Orthodox, et cetera.
And the Orthodox in the sense, but there is, so what I feel like I'm trying to do in a lot of the classes is to take what he's doing, which is still supposing that body of knowledge and trying to simplify it down, because I think I actually take the opposite view. I think that because I think the rabbis who had these experiences, because they had all this body of knowledge, it didn't ground them, it did the opposite. It made them complicate their entire system way too much. And so it's because they were so submerged in such complicated rabbinic world, Midrash and Talmud and Mishnah. And so they tried to link everything in ways that was interesting to them and that made sense to them to speak to each other about it. But I think takes you away from the actual core of what they were experiencing and going through and trying to actually teach. Yeah.
To one other point, in terms
Yeah.
of the way that this book is arranged,
Yeah.
it was really in the introduction.
Yeah.
This is really a collection or compilation of lectures which he gave.
Mhm.
So at no point, it
Mhm.
seems, does the editor, if there really is one,
Yeah.
do they try to actually string it along,
Systematic.
or at least break it down into something that to the neophyte can make sense.
Mhm.
So these are each chapter basically sits by itself.
Mhm.
And so in order to do that, if you're really totally into it,
Yeah.
you subdivide the entire thing, you can understand it in its totality, really not until you get to the last page.
Mhm.
So it's
Well,
that therein lies my problem, and I admit my
yeah,
ignorance.
no, thank you for bringing it up. I really appreciate it. I think that the reason I brought this space, for example, and not Danny Matt has an introduction to Kabbalah, is that it doesn't have much of what I've been talking about since the beginning, which I feel is the essence of Kabbalah, which is the experience that goes with it. And so, Danny Matt will explain, okay, so in this metaphysical system, there are 10 sefirot, and there's a male side and a female side, and there's 4 worlds, and this is what the 4 worlds are. But it feels to me, it's interesting, but it doesn't come alive. Here, he's trying to compare it to like a computer, he's trying to compare it to an architect, he's trying to bring it alive in a way that I think is the essence of Kabbalah. But I think it is true, going through it, that I'm happy to recommend books that are short and which might just kind of say, okay, this is this is like the basic, the foundations of Kabbalah. And from a kind of academic point of view, this is what these are the claims, these are the structures, these are the charts, and that's helpful. And he doesn't quite do it. What he's doing is trying to make it come alive and to lead people to experience Kabbalah, which is what was passed down from, I think was passed down from teacher to teacher. And, if we had, I mean, I've taught before classes on kind of some of the basics part, like the souls and the 10 sefirot and everything, but even then, I probably also do what he's doing, which is, and kind of make it more complicated than it needs to be. It is a lot of information, and it's really dense, and it's hard to find a way to always have it be something one can connect to, and that's but it is interesting, and I want to open it up to. So anyway, thank you for sharing. Anybody else have any other kind of initial comments from it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Morris, yeah.
You talk about four levels. He's
Yeah.
talking about 5.
Mhm. So it's true. So there are four main levels, and this is the Ari who created these. The Ari was in the Middle Ages in Sfat, in northern Israel, and he gave the names to the four worlds, then became a really important part of Kabbalah. And just to link it for everybody, this became a very big part of Judaism. The Ari had a prayer book which went through the Jewish world and became like one of the main prayer books of the Jewish world. And when you're going through this part of the service, he would say you're in this world. When you're going through this part of the service, you're in this world, and everything was mapped out according to it. And that's our Jewish love of connecting everything and then delving into every detail, one after the other, and making it all into a system that makes sense. And it doesn't, and it's all somewhat metaphorical, so it doesn't all make sense in a perfect way. But so let me go back and try and break everything down a little bit to what he's saying and how I think we can relate to it. And then we can go back to that original idea of how we relate to it. So first of all, what are the different worlds? There are different forms of reality. There are other realities that are distinct enough from our reality that they're considered to be almost their own thing. There are different worlds out there. And what it follows is a idea that goes from the most spirit to the more concrete. And there's this beautiful image I'll get to afterwards of God's will taking more and more shape through the world, right? At the beginning he talks about God's light. So God's light, as it comes into every different world, takes on a garment, which means it manifests in a different way. So in our world, God's light manifests in matter, everything we see around us, and if you look at the physics and the way, and how empty space is, but it takes shape around molecule. Anyway, so that God's light takes shape in our world in a very concrete way, but in the other worlds, it becomes embodies and manifests in less concrete ways. I mean, how it connects to last week's chapters, we talked about the different layers, parts of our soul, different parts of ourself. The different parts of ourselves can connect to these different worlds. For most of us, those different levels of the soul are not activated very strongly, so we're not able to connect to those different worlds beyond occasional glimpses of different parts of our lives. But the more you try and activate those parts of your soul, the more you can access the different worlds too. And it's almost like these worlds each have a quality to them, a feeling, and an energy. They're linked to the Sefirot, and even within the four worlds, every world has the 10 Sefirot. So there's like 10 parts of each world, and it goes. So you're creating many more. So I would say just the way we would say that a certain place or a certain time in history, for example, had a feeling to it. I don't know, the 60s had a feeling to it, right? So these worlds have a feeling to them, but it's such a distinct feeling that it's quite different from how. Go ahead. Yeah.
Are they hierarchical?
They are hierarchical in the sense that the ones that are closer to God are considered more holy, more powerful. We're
There's the
trying
list
to.
on page 22.
Mhm,
Where is God and where are we?
mhm. And so.
Just down at a really rudimentary level.
Yeah.
I was completely confused by
Uh-huh.
all that.
So God is on every level. God is everywhere. The Zohar says God surrounds everything and it fills everything. So God is here too. Everything here is God too. It's just God here is manifesting in matter. And in the other worlds, God is manifesting less in matter, more in spirit. Go ahead.
So let me ask you,
Yes.
within those five that are written, and I think we're going the same place. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Been down this road 2 times. So where's God? To your point,
Yes.
I view that God is above Adam Kadam,
As well. Yeah.
above.
Yeah.
Because that is translated into will or the intention. I'm not translated, but that is.
Sure.
But he goes on several pages later to say God has no will.
So yeah,
therein lies one of the, because if you really think about it, if you say that there's no will, these are not the 10 suggestions, they're the 10 commandments, so what are we talking about?
Mhm.
So I understand the transcendent image beyond that, which gives,
Mhm.
which allows all else to happen, and that's
Yeah.
kind of how I interpret it.
Mhm.
But there was some confusion as I'm reading this in terms of how he's describing this. Where's God?
It's, there's paradox in all of it because it doesn't follow our neat rules, just like physics, once you go a certain space up and down, doesn't follow the rules. They're easy for us, but I would say, but this is it, right? The way you describe it, there's the Ein Sof, right? Talk about the Ein Sof for a while, which is infinity. That's unbounded consciousness. It can't have any will, it can't have anything. It's nothingness. It's not nothingness like emptiness. It's nothingness. It's a vibrant, pure consciousness spirit.
Is it
I am that I
self-conscious,
am.
you think, that?
And
Is it conscious
there's-
of itself being
it's
itself?
it's we can reach it. We think we can reach it. But it's so it starts there, and there is an element of self, but there's no will. But somehow out of that, and again, there's mystery to it. Out of that emerges Adam Kadmon. So out of that emerges something with form. That form is not like any form that we can imagine that form can take. It's not like it's a bubble or a square or an oval, but there's some kind of form that comes out of that infinite sea of consciousness that exists in a place of experience. And out of it, something takes form, and that thing that takes form is what then is what we would call God in, let's say, the biblical way, that creates, that guides, that commands, that does all those things. And so it comes out of there, and then out of there, that form of God then projects will down through the worlds. And so that was the image that he had of like building something. So like if you want to build something, right, it starts, this is a very common image. You start with a thought. I would like to build a house. And then that thought eventually becomes a fuller thought with a whole organization to it. And you maybe speak about it to other people, and you put it down to paper, and you have feelings, and eventually then it becomes, you do it, right? You make it happen. It becomes an actual house. And so that's the way God's will through the worlds travels to make it happen, except we tend to think, well, the only thing that's really valuable is the house because it's concrete, because that's what but in this view, maybe more valuable is just that place where there's only all the thoughts because it's infinite possibility. And maybe the place where it's just another place is more important, and where it's all the house.
Even before thought, you could say there's ideas. And the highest level, the level that we call Atzila, is the level of the nascent idea. There's an idea. Now, what's an idea and how is it different from the form of the thing?
Well, I mean, it's spirit even more than an idea is really the next level. But I just want to finish this image of the will. And it's the only way that I can, one of the ways I thought to maybe talk about this is the way human beings' will keeps us going, right? We say sometimes when they're very elderly and they don't have the will anymore, and you know their body collapses, right? Don't have the will to continue going on. Or you say some people have such a strong will to keep going on through every illness, everything. You know, my grandfather, he kept, and every time we did call us, and every time they call us, tell this is it. And my father would fly in from Europe and go see my grandfather, but he had such a strong will to live. This is my grandfather. And so it's the sense that our willpower infuses our whole body on some level. Of course, there's all kinds of automatic things happening in our body. But the power of our mind over our body is huge. And the more, right, the placebo effect, right? The fact that there's so much in science, in medicine. So I'm just saying, so the will, that's the willpower. So just like our will to some degree keeps our whole body together and moving, God's will is what keeps all of this together. And so God's will starts from the purest way, which is just an idea of what everything should be, and then moves down. Now, God's will is very different than our will, right? God's will is Vayihi or, let there be light, and suddenly it changes into some huge cosmic thing that affects the physical world as well.
But doesn't
So it's
God
a-
want us to complete that? That's what I got out of reading, is that the difference between creation and formation, and then, well, God created the world
Mhm,
out of nothingness, but then he formed man from somethingness. But
mhm.
I think what I got was that we're supposed to continue doing that.
Well, we're for the Kabbalists, we're trying, we live in the lowest worlds and the most physical world, and we're trying to slowly go up to more refined and then I think if you look at humanity, you see we're doing this. We're doing it in a very slow way, but we're doing it, right? Human beings right now are so much more subtle, so much more spiritual than they were. We were a lot more concrete thousands of years ago. The more our as a species, we take steps back and forward, but overall we're a lot more subtle. And this is the evolution. The Kabbalah is really into evolution. And so the evolution of human consciousness is to be more and more integrating and to connect to these other worlds. So we're bringing those worlds into our lives. So we already, let's say, I always use Einstein, right? Einstein is playing the violin and suddenly an idea drops into his head. He's connecting to that world, to that space. We all in our times have felt a little bit here, a little bit there, an intuition about something, and so we're connecting to other worlds throughout our lives. And the goal is to more and more do so because that elevates the whole, and that's our purpose as human beings, right? That's what does it mean that we fell from the Garden of Eden? It means that we're trying to go back to a place of living in that kind of unity and that kind of subtle consciousness and that kind of sense of less concrete living. And there's an intellectual part of that, there's an emotional part of that, and there's a spirit part of that, different ways that we're not just living in the most concrete way. And I mean, I experience this, there's times in life where you feel you're very concrete, and there's certain people that one meets, you think this person is very concrete or not concrete, and there's some people who doesn't make it. It's not always easy to tell just from that moment. You can't judge a person by that, but we live in different parts of us, and the game of Kabbalah is to more and more try and integrate and bring in because the more you go up, the closer you're to God, and the higher there, right? This is what the Torah talks about, for example, and it says that the patriarchs and matriarchs didn't need the Torah, they just lived it because they were in a state of mind of being really good people and living everything they needed to live, right? And so there's a sense of there's states of mind that you can be in where you're naturally living just very well and doing good and being good. And so the Torah of itself is a document to help people to get to that place. But you can live in that place of goodness within yourself. That's a state of mind. That's a world. That's this. So the movement of humanity is to move more and more into those states of mind, which then allow us to naturally work all that goodness into our life, into our world. Does that help? But I'll go ahead. Go ahead.
I think what I'm hearing, so I have been trying to think of this as a hierarchy with God in one end and me at the other, and a series of like
Straight up.
tiers and also these like sheets blocking out the light.
Yeah.
So that, to make it so that I, because I can't handle God's in his or her
Yeah.
full form.
Yeah.
But I think now what I think I'm hearing you say is that it's a framework of, sort of the way thought breaks down from this original identity or will down to an action at the other end. Is that?
Yeah, well, I think that's why, for example, so if you were to look in the basic Kabbalah manual of anybody, they would say, okay, you have these four worlds and there's strata in between. But what Aryeh Kaplan is trying to bring out too is that it's more I want to say it's more complex, but it's more alive than that. And it's not, it's not concepts, and so the whole world is part of God, right? It's panentheistic, right? God is everything in this world and more. We're part of one of those worlds. We're in this world, right? We're in the world of Asiya. And we're part of God. Everything is part of God, but this is a part of God that's manifesting. God's will is manifesting through our world in a very physical way. And we can go back, right? Like that image of the glass blower from last time, right? We can go back and try and experience a less physical way of being in reality by going back into God's will. And the closer we are to God's purest will, also we're doing God's will more, which means we're doing good, we're being good, we're more in tune, we're more in unity with all of it.
But is it that we're starting out down here, or is it that we're starting out over here and moving in that direction?
We're all humanity is slowly moving up. I mean, one of the maybe a way to kind of poetic way of understanding it that I find really compelling is, so Rav Kook, who was the first chief rabbi of pre-state Israel, he had this poem he wrote called The Four Songs. And he talked about how there's one song that we sing, which is just about our own self, you know, our needs, our lives, our place. And there's another song that's the song of our people. And that's the movements of our people, the movements of what they're doing. And then there's a beautiful song, it's the song of all of humanity, that the movements of humanity, the growth of it. And then there's a song of the entire cosmos that one can sing. And then there's a song beyond all of it, where you're singing for everybody. And so it's a sense of what are we communing with? Are we just communing with our own self and our own needs, or are we communing with ever larger and broader parts of our cosmos and of what's going on? Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
I'm just a little bit confused and I
Sure.
want to make sure, very confused actually. So these are all of the worlds that God made and
Yes.
different things happen on these different planes. And
Yes.
sometimes we can connect to different ones for moments, but really it's like, so we're action? That's what
We're in the world of action of the sea. We're in the concrete world where we move around and we connect with each other. We you know, we touch each other and we do all the
But
things.
we also have ideas too.
But we
have
also
thoughts.
have all these things.
We have all that
And the
stuff
more,
too.
and that's why I was saying that the more we evolve as humanity, the more we're able to connect to the other worlds.
But,
And-
okay, so
Good.
what happens in the world of speech or thought or mind or will?
Okay,
Like
so
what happens to
let me break down the worlds as I understand them, and then it's a little bit different in how he does it. He's closing it in more traditional language. So for example, the world of Atzilut, which is right after Adam Kadmon, right? Which means, he doesn't say this, but Atzilut means emanation. So it's a world of just pure energies, just pure spirit. That's a world where there's just spirit there. There's no much shape to it. Then there's the world of Bria. Bria is the world of mind. It's like the universal consciousness, right? That idea of we've heard of universal consciousness. So there's a place.
He said Atsiyut was mind and Aryeh was thought.
There's-
That's
there's-
just what it
there-
says here, so that's why.
It's true. Well, it's not totally, there's different ways of looking at it. In my system, I mean, there's higher mind and there's lower mind and there's in the Sphirot and everything, but so Bria is more mind. Bria is usually considered to be mind. Bria is but it's higher mind. Bria is like where I think Einstein, for example, would receive an idea from, or, you know, it's the universal consciousness, right? It's where all the ideas of humanity are kind of stored, or that, you know, when you study so many areas, it's like when you have an idea that falls into your mind, but it's not like a very concrete idea. It's not like how to build the IKEA dresser. That's not what's in Bria. Bria is much higher. It's like patterns. It's the DNA of the universe. It's like the great sweeps of how you understand creation and
The root
everything.
is from to create,
Mhm.
so that to me implies something a little higher than putting together. Right?
Beautiful, yeah. It's from It's where everything is created from. Atzilut is beyond even the idea of creation, it's just pure spirit. And so Bria is the realm of ideas, but high ideas, the patterns of the universe, and the places that I think humanity, in the last, especially, different moments in the last few hundred years, has been accessing that place more and bringing it into its understanding of so many things, of science, of what it means to be alive, all these things.
I'm sorry, in spirit, what happens in spirit? That's just like,
So spirit is like imagine a world where there's just the most powerful primal energies. It's like, just pure energy, that has no shape to it. It's just forces, cosmic forces of incredible power.
like what goes on there? What's the, I guess.
That's where everything, that's where that spirit then descends from that world and goes into those world of the DNA of the universe and gives that power and makes it come down the worlds. It's kind of, no, this is super interesting, to talk about this and to explain this, but I think that it's the,
Like, is it our spirit is what, like, how like we all have like. our
Yeah,
spiritual
well,
part, is that what it is? Just like.
so no, it's great. This part of us that we feel is spirit, that we experience the spirit in our lives, whatever we do where we feel spirit is, I guess, comes to some degree from there, but is like a small little idea of what happens in that place. And so the more, for example, when we take care of that part of us that is spirit, we're trying to connect to that place and bring down its power into our world. When you feel spirit in a musical Shabbat, or when you feel spirit talking to someone, or feel spirit in some other space, it's connecting to a place of pure spirit and trying to bring its power. I mean, why some speakers, for good and for bad, right? You think about the Nazis and this thing, are able to, using the power of their voice, control vast amounts of people and everything, right? There's power to words, right? And so if you bring spirit into words, that spirit makes those words land in a much more intense and powerful way. So you bring spirit to anything, right? It makes it more powerful.
Well, it could be used
So-
incorrectly.
So it could be used, there's a lot been written about the Nazis using
That's what I was
symbols
thinking.
and things incorrectly, but essentially there's world spirit, but that's also the spirit that, God said, let there be light. That spirit, and it comes down and takes on shape and becomes physical shape and takes everything. And so it's like, imagine these huge currents, right? It's called wind, or that's the only way we can understand it, right? In Hebrew, ruach is one of the ways it's talking about spirit, which also means wind. So it's kind of like it's the least concrete movement that we have in our universe, and we're trying to bring more of that into us, into that power, that spirit. So there's a place where one can connect to there through meditation, prayer, where you just feel that spirit. You go beyond your experience of physicality, and you're just in that place of spirit, and that brings back down that spirit into your physicality. And so then you have a place where you have the next level, which is things that aren't like I'm touching you or doing, which is like speech, right? Speech is also, doesn't have shape to it. Emotions are also considered to be part of that world. And that's the world of Yetzirah. It's a place of emotion, it's a place of sound. When we have strong feelings in Kabbalah, it's coming from that place. And those, feelings can be, right? Those can be the most powerful part of one's life, right? Those can give whole arcs to your life over decades, and they can be so much more powerful. So the feelings, there's a whole world where that's the main mode of being. Just like for us, the main mode of being is physicality, and we bring some feelings, we bring some sound, we bring some spirit, but in those worlds, that's the main mode. And as it becomes speech, and as God's will coming down becomes speech and becomes what we call feelings, it takes more and more shape. It starts to become what we call shape, like matter. And so the matter, then it becomes what we call matter, what they say through what they call angels, which is this like shape form that's bringing organization to matter and bringing it into this world.
So was that the Yetzirah?
Yeah,
just
yeah,
talking
it's
about-
Sira, yeah,
Yetzirah?
it's Sira. Mhm.
Right, is there? This is gonna sound so stupid, but I don't know how else to think about
Go
it.
for
Like,
it.
so is it like a bunch of people there, like us, but they're just on a higher level, or is it
Yeah,
like?
no, it's really, it's a really good question. And so, right, we have this concept, which, again, is to some degree part of, we interact with it in mainstream Judaism all the time. Okay, when you die, where do you go, right? You go to Olam Haba, the world to come. That's what we talk about,
Up or
right?
down.
And then up or down, and then why do you say Kaddish? According to the real tradition, you say Kaddish to help them go up further and further up. You don't say Kaddish for yourself, you say it for them, for their soul, to get a boost with every time you say Kaddish. That's
What we're
the,
doing when we die, we're going to these different.
and so, it's,
Okay, I'm just trying to
you
like.
go to number
picture
D3.
what's
You
happening
go to
here,
D3
so I
if
can
you,
understand it.
it's more complicated. The way, I actually love the way Kabbalah thinks about this, and I recently but there's a documentary coming out this month that's going to be on TV where I speak about all this in the afterlife on ABC. Yeah, in the Kabbalah, the simplified form is, okay, there's a place, the world to come, which is heaven, and there is heaven. Really, in Kabbalah, the way they talk about it is the afterlife is the state of mind from which you live your life while you're here. Then you kind of get drawn like a magnet to a place that fits your state of mind, the place from where you live. And then you are in that place from where you live. But let me just so there is a sense that in these other places there are souls, souls of the departed, but also souls who have not yet been born. That there is maybe far beyond what we can imagine, and that there is all kinds of divine life. I mean, the way they see it, to some degree, we like to think that we're the center, and we talk about ourselves being the center, but also we're like the footstool. There's a whole, we're nothing. We're like, there's much more interesting things happening in those other places, and all kinds of grand unfoldings and plans and ideas and things going on in those other places too.
If you layer this,
Yeah.
you kind of create this as laminar flow, if you will,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that you've got all these different layers.
Yeah,
And within a hierarchical system, easy
Yeah.
enough to say, but
Yeah.
every once in a while.
Yeah.
Personally, every
Yeah.
once in a while societally, every once in
Yeah.
a while in a broader society,
sure,
there is something that seems to transcend,
yes,
and that is inspiration. So,
Yes.
you invoked Einstein,
yeah,
who it seems was able to reach some level of thought and association,
mhm,
not just because he was a gifted mathematician, but he took it
yes,
several steps
inspiration,
further.
exactly, yeah.
So it was that inspiration. Can we assume that even though these are laminar, that in that distance necessarily is in that? So where would you put a tremendous inspiration, something that is pivotal from
Yeah,
the standpoint of either the
Mhm.
person
yeah,
recognizing something about yourself
yeah,
versus something about society versus something about the broader society?
yeah.
Where does that pinprick go?
So I mean, we think about how vast our world is. I mean, it's a huge, vast world. The other worlds are just as vast, no more. So we don't know exactly, but I would say from my understanding that, for example, in Einstein and that level of mind and association and thinking is Bria, for example. He wasn't always in Bria, but periodically in Bria and able from that place to also access vast amount, where we talk about the DNA of the universe is there. So from there, the association is it's not all coming from mind power. The inspiration is coming from being in a place where there's unitive mind consciousness and all that knowledge is there. I mean, people talk about this and, we don't have any proof but the only thing we have is NDEs, right? And so people who've had near-death experiences, and they often talk about that when after they've had a near-death experience, they come back and they felt they were in a place where they felt their mind was connected to everything else, to the body. Not all the time, but there's all kinds of things that can't be explained. The people who are, having an NDE while they're on the bed, and they come back and they say, well, proven, I knew what was happening in the other room while I was having the NDE. How is that possible? Nobody can explain those things, and these are thousands of cases that are documented. So there's things that we get hints of these in our lives when we're in this. We can move between them, but there is also a sense of boundaries between these main worlds. And that's kind of what he was talking about later on, that we have this tradition that in the temple and the tabernacle, there was the ark, and the ark were the two angels. And if you concentrated on the angels, you could access another world and so on. And the tradition, if we go back to the beginning, is that, right, the angels, when they leave the Garden of Eden, there's like these angels who are guarding that world, right? They have these flaming swords. This is the book of Genesis, and they no longer can go there. And so I think that's an understanding that it's not so easy to go between the different worlds. There's barriers, so to speak, and we only really can go through them through grace, through God's grace in the system, or through our tremendous efforts to get there. And that's kind of part of it. And that to get to the place where a whole society is regularly going through those worlds is incredibly difficult. But when you do that, what do? You bring down those incredible ideas, you bring back down incredible spirit, you bring down things that transform humanity. And this is how the Kabbalists see the very idea of Judaism. The Jews were created to be a people that could create a society where we could live in this space where we could transcend just the physical world and start to bring down ideas and thoughts and spirits from the higher worlds. And so what does it mean when God said in the Exodus, you shall be a people of priests, right? That's what God says, that we should be a people who are living in a certain state of mind, morally, ethically, spiritually, to be able to bring down some of these ideas into the world from the higher places. It requires us to live a certain way with each other. I mean, we had the priesthood, right, who were living even at a higher level. And then we had the tabernacle and the temple, where kind of there was a place where it was a center point. And if we think about the ancient Jewish society, right, what were we? We were a tiny people in a tiny place, and we were living disconnected from the rest of the Near East, both connected, but trying to disconnect from their religious practices and morals and values as best we could. But in that space, we brought through a book and a society that informs, that's a foundation of 2/3 of the world, or half the world, and we continue, right? The Jewish people have continued as best we can to be that vehicle for trying to bring down ideas and thoughts and spirits that transform humanity. And so this is the Kabbalists saw the Jewish people as a consecrated people to live a certain way, to bring down from those higher worlds all of those things. And that was best achieved in our first 1,000 years, because we were living morally, ethically a certain way. I mean, for its time, if we were to live with them now, we might think you guys are kind of primitive, or think more primitive than we're used to. But for its time, they were living in a very advanced way that helped all of humanity evolve in a certain sense. It was kind of like it was speeded up evolution. That's the way the Kabbalists understand the Jewish mission. Bring speeded up evolution to a moment in time, and to a people in time, to help everything else. And you see the effect, right? You see the effect over history and millennia. But again, to make it possible is very hard, because you have to connect to those worlds. First of all, you have to have an understanding of how you connect, right? This goes back to Kabbalah, right? It was passed from person to person. Meditative practices, you have to live morally and ethically well so that your vessel is good. And then you can start to do, what they were bringing through in their own way was maybe no less transformative for humanity on a certain level than Einstein was in our time, in terms of a book and ideas that were in a state of consciousness. Go ahead. No, oh, I thought you were-
I'm just following you.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah. It's a very specific, it's a very specific way of looking at.
I like what you're doing.
Reality,
But
and
yeah,
trying to create a whole,
Yeah.
the whole thing around it and how, us as Jews. And so, as a Jewish people, we're still trying to live, we, you know, our, well, after we left, after we were in a place, we were in the land, being able to do this in a very conscious, intense way. For 2,000 years, we lost some of that ability to do it because we were focused on survival. Maybe developed other things, and we were still able to do it to some degree. And we think about the Jews who have contributed to humanity in so many endless ways over 2,000 years, but it wasn't like this intense spiritualized society. And you read the Bible, and people were having spiritual experiences very often, you know, and there were prophets who were hearing God. So what does it mean the prophets were hearing God's very words? They were connecting to those higher worlds where God's will is so clear. Down here, God's will is like very hard to perceive, but if you're able to connect higher up, you're actually able to hear God's very voice. And so they were able to connect to those places. Though again, the way Judaism sees it is, in our day, we don't have those people, partly because of the exile and so on, but also because back then they really needed that guidance from high above, because human beings were living at such a, you know, their level of life was much more basic. And, you know, we think about the things that we consider to be atrocities now, or everyday occurrences there, you know, spread out throughout everywhere, you know, and so there was a need to try and bring things forward in a much more intentional way. Go ahead, Karen, go ahead.
So, the reason that God made all of these is because we can't handle. I feel like it said something about this, but
Yes,
I had a very
yes.
hard time understanding. all of
Yeah.
this.
No, so if you were to one day, if you were to just walk around and just, and suddenly your mind opens up to Bria, for example, that would blow your circuits. It would be like having, you know, your old DOS, you know, computer system, and suddenly having your modern Intel, you know, processor trying to work through DOS. You're gonna get that blue screen, right? It's not gonna work, you know, your whole system's gonna crash. And so there's a sense of, I mean, human beings, we are where we are, and through this work, we try and evolve our apparatus to be able to take in. And someone like Einstein was a very evolved soul, right? Kabbalah believes in reincarnation, so he was a very evolved soul who had developed, let's say, his mind ability so that he came into the world being able to access some of those worlds, some of that place easier. But all of us have that ability if we put in the work to do it. Every single person, there's no person who doesn't have it. Right? It's kind of like our birthright as human beings to be able to do this if we put in, but you can't, and you could have a glimpse, you could have the moment of inspiration. And I think this is the way religion in general sees it. You know, almost everybody has moments of inspiration, of doors opening, of feeling something that there's more to this world than just a physical reality. And the question is, what do you do with it afterwards? You know, you then try and integrate it and make it part of your life and then change your circuit, or do you just let it pass till the next one comes and then life just goes on? And so the more you try and work into all of it, the more you're able to, the more your computer processor is powerful and is able to do all of its processing and to bring in things for yourself and for humanity and to fulfill its purpose in a greater way. And so why did God create it? I mean, that question is, you know, there's a lot that we talked about to some degree last week. I mean, maybe God created it just to get a sense of pleasure out of seeing some kind of unfolding
His
that's happening
entertainment, I think. we call it.
over billions of years. Well, how can we understand? We can
Why
understand.
not?
Why not? We can enter that and understand that, but what the Kabbalists are saying from their very ability to map out these worlds and understand this is the gift of being a human being is that with our minds, we can suddenly touch on these realities. We can have a little touch of the world where everything is in the emotions, and we can have a little touch in that place of inspiration. We can have a touch in the world of spirit. We can even touch the place beyond that, the place of unbounded consciousness that's beyond all of it. That we think that we can easily touch that place, but it's really beyond everything. And by touching these places, it makes us, it enlightens us, knowing what we're doing in this very life, walking through all of
But
it.
I don't see it as if God is the puppeteer, you know,
Yeah,
holding us on strings, telling us to do stuff. It's like we have to figure it out ourselves.
that's part of the, well, there's, through all of it, God is sending us at different moments opportunities to take paths and to do things and to go more and now more into it. And it's up to us whether we do or not. We have free will, so we can. I think that going back to that concept of evolution, the idea of Kabbalah as all of humanity is invariably going to. It might take the long path, or the very, very long path, or the shorter path, and it's up to all of us how fast or not that happens in our own life. We can only control our own life, right? That's the only thing we all have, and that's.
Can't even really control that all that well.
We can't control the physical. We might not be able to control many of the physical things, but we can control this part and how much of this we want to bring into our life. That's what they would say. The more you bring this into your life, not necessarily the study of reading inner space, but just the whole package of trying to bring spirit, of trying to evolve, trying to grow who we are. What does it mean for us to be alive? And to ask those questions and to do the moral, ethical work to hold it and to connect ever more, then we're fulfilling our purpose well.
It's a totally different
Go
question.
for it.
So we have Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, but there's also the apex of the Yud. What is that?
I mean,
And I
so,
guess I'm
I mean,
thinking of
there's,
letters.
so I actually do a meditation once a week that's based on that idea. But there's an idea, it's a visualization, and it's just an idea that you go higher and higher. I mean, is there a hierarchy? Yes, you go higher and higher, and that's so the bottom is the bottom hay, then the vav and the hay, and the yud, and at the very yud there's a crown,
Right.
and at the very top of the crown, that dot, the very dot of it is that place of unbounded consciousness. And really, what is it in a way? It's a way of, if you can focus your mind on the dot and not have anything else come into it, you can experience a little bit of that. But you have to be able to take all your thoughts and let all of them go and around and just completely put all your mind just on that dot at the top of it's an exercise. Then you can get to a place that's kind of beyond that thought and experienced. And even then, what are you really experiencing? You know, who knows? Maybe you're just experiencing Yetzirah, maybe you're this, but it's considered to be it's a whole system. And I mean, so the Ari, maybe a final point, the Ari, the mystic from Tzfat in northern Israel, who came up with the idea of the four worlds, and made, or at least created the system around it. His ideas were really very powerful and caught on throughout the Jewish world at its time. And this is a scholarly way of looking at it. They say because he gave life meaning, right? He said that you're part of something much, much greater, and in you and yourself, what you do affects everything else. And they say, well, that gave people a sense of being part of something that after the expulsion from Spain, after a time of great shattering. And so I think part of all of this is that it gives life tremendous meaning to look at it this way. And it means we can do something part in our own lives to be part of the cosmic mission and unfolding. And as a Jewish people, we have a purpose, which is more than just surviving from generation to generation for some, just survival. But we're trying to bring into the world these new ideas, these new thoughts, these new spirit. And I think objectively, if you look at our people, that's what we've been doing. We've been striving to do. And every time we try and get away from it, we get pulled back into it. This is, and I think that all of this the reason why I like teaching it, and I think it's not just for 40-year-old males, and that was the way it was, is there were a period of time we're bringing this in and connecting it to our modern sensibility, which is so evolved and in other ways, you bring it together, creates a very powerful whole together. But it does take work, and especially if one is, I think if one is trained scientifically, and your whole worldview comes from that place, it's very hard to bring the two together.
I
Yeah,
disagree. I totally disagree.
okay,
There are a few things
Yeah.
that I was thinking. One
Sure.
of them is, in order to achieve a greater level of being,
yeah,
it takes a certain amount of active contemplation, which seems oxymoronic, but it's not. You have to basically force the issue. So you have to develop a sense of inner peace. You have to develop deep thinking about
Beautiful.
thinking,
yeah.
kind of bringing it through this. Now,
Beautiful.
interestingly enough, and I'm probably the worst person to say this, but that's kind of like a great reason for Shabbat, because it forces you to take the time
Mm.
to actually consider things worth considering. Not only then can you really begin to understand a greater level. You keep saying something that we are evolving to a greater level, and I dare say I disagree. The reason why I disagree is because we have been so gripped with certain isms, commercialism, materialism, those other things which are anathema to the sense of a good being. You know, social media, I think, is a scourge on society, where every moment of our day, we are looking at what our telephone or whatever thing is telling us. And it's and monetize it, baby, but the issue is that we have so many distractions that we can scarcely see what's in front of us. So I keep dropping.
It keeps dropping.
Uh,
I know,
I mean-
maybe it's trying to tell me something, but
That's it.
yeah.
I just want to respond to that one, and I think it's something I often talk about, and often people say, how could you say we're evolving? Look at our world. And I say, well, we're, one day for God is 1,000 years for us. I'm not looking in 20 years or even 50 years. But at least you look at certain moments, even in our own lifetimes or in the last 100 years, for example, 60s and 70s, and so many people are talking about love as a value that transcends commercialism. Maybe we swing back for a while, and maybe we do this. But I think if you look at society right now, there's no other point in time where so many people were able to live in a way that was comfortable, where they have time for it. And even social media, which I am not engaged with and I really dislike in every way, but maybe it is a tool that eventually, I look at young people now and they're able to do 20 things at once, right? There's one part of their mind is on email, one part of their mind is on their Facebook account. And then that eventually, not well, yes, but over 20, 30, 40, 50 years, that's a new ability for human beings that's joining in, and eventually will hopefully get channeled into new things. So I think looking at the long term, seeing humanity, consciousness evolving, and even not so long, I was reading the account of the World Fair, right, in Chicago. And you read what was going on there, and just the people dying of diseases, and getting run over left, right, and center by trains, and just a general atmosphere of what was happening, and so I maybe we're not evolving between now and 5 years ago, but maybe if you look at the vast stretches of time, slowly since the Enlightenment, humanity has taken huge leaps forward. Yeah,
My
yeah,
comment, though, is that
yeah,
if you do not allow contemplation,
yes,
thought, discussion,
yeah,
and these are the things that are being washed away from our system. Yeah, I admit, last 5, 10, 15 years, more so.
yeah,
But the more that you can separate yourself from that,
yeah,
now to the point about if we are consumed by science and we might not be able to see it, I disagree, because I think that the issue is that the deeper you go into the scientific aspects of things, the more you reject the dogma, the more you begin to question, the more you know, and then you can be really reverse some of the stuff that had been taught in the past because it was wrong.
yeah,
So if you can get your head to that place where there's knowledge that transcends that thing, which is what you're told,
mhm,
the greater your chance of actually getting a glimpse of something greater.
I completely agree with that, and I think it's it's that spirit which is what connects to this. And the only thing that's, you know, that's the barrier to it is that the methodology is a little bit different. So if one gets stuck in some of the methodology of it and said, well, this is all, then I think it can prevent one from going fully into it. But I agree, it's the method of looking at things precisely and as best as one can empirically, which allows us to get rid of dogma. And I think dogma is, the more we go forward, the more dogma has to go, has to disappear.
And, but there are things within what little I've seen
Yes.
that you can draw analogies. By the way, you know, we didn't even talk about the Dalai Lama. But which is kind of an interesting name because it's
Mhm.
concept that the spirit appears almost randomly within a given population. And they identify that this person is the leader.
Mhm.
Fascinating concept.
Mhm.
You know, I don't buy into it, but it's interesting. It's really interesting. So we can ask, and there are certain things within different cultures. All of these things. So the more you expose yourself to to that type of information, the more you can see the truth and the patterns behind it. Not suggesting we live in a matrix, but rather to say that
Mhm.
the more we prepare, the more we see, the greater our chances of actually reaching a higher level of being.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think,
Just saying.
and this is the Jewish version of it, which is also linked to the Jewish mission, you know, the idea of who connected to all the different other parts of our being. But, you know, it's interesting where if we think about the way I was describing Jewish people, as we were kind of a secluded kingdom of priests trying to live in a certain way and producing something, you know, and the only other people that I can think of, or one of the only people I can think who lived that way were the Tibetans, right? They're on top of the world. They had this whole society that was based around spirit and spirituality, and they've also now, as they're leaving that, and brought something to the world that's being spread, like, you know, and people are finding tremendous.
I don't think of the Jews as being isolated. I mean, Judaism came into existence at Grand Central Station. Right? I mean, the Middle East is in the middle.
I thought you were literal. I'm
I
sorry.
mean, it wasn't isolated, but they were doing everything they could to stop the people from intermingling religiously and
Yeah.
culturally and in every way with the other people, and to live a different path, right? That appears throughout all of the Tanakh and Torah and there's certain moments of time where, for example, in the Second Temple period, I mean, scholars will often say, you know, why one of the reasons they think Judaism may have survived through the millennia is that there was a period of time during the Second Temple times where the Jews were just left alone. They were quasi under the Persian Empire, but there was nothing else bothering them, and they just spent 200-300 years just completely indrawn
You're talking
building
about
their
during the Second Temple.
Second
period.
Temple, yeah, there before the Greeks came in, right before the Greeks came in, and they were completely just focused inwardly and building what it means to be Jewish, and that was so strong that when it met Greek culture, it was able to survive and still and not be just assimilated to Greek culture and then continue to go on. And so there are periods where Jewish culture and life was just had moments of being isolated and bound within itself. But and then there are moments when we took it out into the world, right, and then brought it to everywhere else. And anyway, thank you everybody for
Thank
coming.
you. I don't agree with that at all.
Which are,
I think that Judaism built itself in competition with other societies around it. And by constantly competing,
Mhm.
whether it was with the Egyptians or the Assyrians or the Babylonians or the Germans or the Russians, there's this constant need to intellectually defend our ideas and hone them and make them stronger. And that it was the openness of the Jews to other cultures that enabled us to survive.
I mean, there's truth to that as well. But you know, in key moments in our history, we took on ideas from other cultures, which allowed us to morph into something new and to take it on. But there's also, why did our culture not just become completely assimilated into others as so many
Because we
thousands of others did. But why do we compete? Why? Because our ideas were strong enough and we believed in them strongly enough that we didn't just abandon them, which is what most people did, right? Most people abandoned their ideas and took on the idea of the time. We were so stuck in our idea that we had to struggle with how does our idea work with this new big culture that it's in relationship with, and then work with it. And you're right, in Greek culture, but before Greek culture, as I was saying, there was 200-300 years in the Persian Empire where Judaism became so strong in itself that it developed. That's what the scholars say anyway. I'm not a scholar of that period, and we don't have much proof, but that's what they say. That was a period of building Jewish identity in a very profound way.
But
Yes.
just one little fine point, you have from little, very mild empiric evidence, there are certain traits in the genetics that you can trace. And when you have a population that kind of sticks to itself, with itself for a long period of time, those traits tend to replicate within it. Sometimes to its detriment, sometimes to its betterment. But for instance, you know, the entire thing, why was the bringing the Ethiopians back, why was that really justified? Well, actually, because there's a characteristic on the Y chromosome, yes, that the same, that will tell you, and that is unique to, or almost unique to Jewish history. So that is kind of indicative of there's a period of time where we kind of stuck to ourselves.
Different
Otherwise,
periods,
in different periods.
Yeah.
And so you can't absolutely specify, but just from the standpoint of biology,
Yeah,
are we a separate species? No, but it's almost to the level of being, almost, don't quote me on that, it's almost to being a subspecies. So it's more than a red-crested finch versus a blue, you know, but it is a certain something that tends to fall within that. So that kind of sticks with the idea, yes, we kind of maintained ourselves. We didn't disperse within the entire area. So just saying.
but there were, I think what you're saying is totally true. There were moments where we were completely in relationship with the other and other had to define ourselves very strongly in relationship to it. But there was also this very strong sense of being inward looking, right? The endless prohibitions of having any contact with other people. And of course, nothing was perfect. There were all the endless stories of rejecting the idols and the religions, which the other Near Eastern traditions don't have that. They don't have that same idea of rejecting. They were much more into the pantheon. Let's add that. We had this very strong sense of we're a separate people, we're a kingdom of priests, we're trying to live in our way. And you know, obviously, in the whole story of the Bible, and it's a lens of the struggle of the people, because people want to get drawn into doing what everybody else is doing, and then being drawn in.
Well, I mean, I think our society we live in now requires us to compete,
Yeah,
right? And we can either compete and justify our purpose or not, in which case we'll fail. So that's, you know,
I mean, it's one of the things I love about this period for Judaism and synagogues is that, you know, you can't just take it as a given that people are going to be Jewish. You have to actually make them feel like there's a worth to it, and that our being Jewish has a purpose to it. Because if not, you know, there's a choice, which there wasn't. So I actually think it's a good thing for Judaism that we have to think about what we're all about.
When do we meet again?
Yeah, so I think I don't have dates yet, but I expect it will be, what's Thursday or Monday? Anybody have preferences or?
Monday.
Okay,
Well,
Well, Monday is David's study.
yeah, that's right. So Monday is David's study. I mean, we could do 6:30, but I think we will do. Just looking at my calendar, potentially June 5th.
Fifth,
Thursday,
did
June
you say?
5th. Yeah, June
Okay.
5th. And I'll pick some other dates throughout the summer.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Nice to see you,
Always a pleasure.
even if your cat keeps falling.
You know,